Welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay.
And welcome to another episode of Pit Lane Parlay. My name is host Mike Jokum. I am joined tonight by road and track writer, amongst other publications, Bozi Tatarevic. Bozi, how you doing tonight, first off?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Thanks for joining me here. We're going to do some IMSA chatting tonight, switch things up as the Roar Before the 24 took place this weekend, and the Rolex is in a couple of weeks where Jess and I will be down there in person covering the race. So we're going to talk everything IMSA engines today. And I thought, who better to have on than Bozi, who does a lot of automotive writing and seems like a super smart guy from what I've read. So why don't we dive right into it at a high level? We'll go over the different classes and what their engines are. And, we can go in depth on some of the more prominent engines here. So we'll start with the DPI class. What can you tell us about the DPI class and any sort of engine discussion?
So the DPI class has production-based engines, so to say. So they're homologated like most of the classes. And I've explored a few of them. We'll start kind of with the most probably well-known as far as like American cars are concerned, which is the Cadillac. So the Cadillac engine is built by ECR, Earnhardt Childress Racing Engines. So they're well known in the NASCAR world. They build a lot of the Chevrolet engines for NASCAR and for some of those teams, but they also build the engine for the Cadillac DPI. And that engine is based loosely on the LS series of engines. So the LS started with the Corvette in the late 90s, and it's still going today, which is a pushrod-based engine. Jumping over to another class for a little bit, the Corvette C7R, which is the previous generation Corvette, had an engine based on a similar platform, but the new Corvette is going to a newer engine, which we'll get to in a little while. But now I think this is the last, as far as like the GM pushrod-based engines, this is the last one that's there. Of course, this engine is heavily modified for racing, but it is based on what's found in the street car. And then from that point, we kind of move over to Mazda. Mazda's engine is kind of mysterious. I haven't really had a lot of in-depth view of it, and they haven't really shared too much. But the Mazda engine, which they call the MZT, is vastly different from the Cadillac engine, because the Cadillac engine is a V8, naturally aspirated V8 pushrod motor, versus the Mazda engine that's a turbocharged four-cylinder. The Mazda motor has 2 liters of displacement, and from what I understand, is based somewhat on their MZ or MZR series of engines. They call the DPI engine the MZT. And basically, that engine is kind of based on that, but it is fully built by AER, Advanced Engine Research. And they're kind of a specialist racing engine company, kind of like ECR, but more on, the sports car side and some of these other series. And it's the MZ series of engines. There are still a few of those, I think, in production Mazdas, but the most well-known for kind of racing people will probably be in the 3rd generation or NC generation Miata. That one had a naturally aspirated version of that kind of MZ series of engines. And it was also in a whole bunch of other kind of stuff, like the Ford Fusion, because Ford owned Mazda at the time. But it's been around for a little bit, but not too much is known exactly as far as exactly what they changed and how they changed it.
The Mazda engine is the one that, if I remember correctly, has had some reliability issues over the last couple of years in IMSA, correct?
Correct. Yeah, they had some reliability issues, some heat issues mostly, I think, because they had a few fires and a few failures of certain components. And I think that a lot of a lot of that is just because that engine is so stressed, trying to make all of that power out of a 4-cylinder versus these other teams that are, a turbocharged 4-cylinder versus all of these other teams that are kind of using different formulas. So it's I think a lot of it is just the development of the engine and putting so much heat through it and trying to get, hundreds more horsepower than what the original engine was designed for, that they ended up, with some issues that led to some fires and some other reliability concerns.
And the only other one I'm curious about, well, the only other entry then is the Acura Team Penske with the Acura engine. Is there anything interesting about that? I see it's a 3.5 liter turbo V6, so it's a little unique, but anything more in depth on the Acura?
So the Acura engine is actually very interesting, and the folks from Honda Performance Development were nice enough to give me an up-close view and give me access to some of their engineers a few months back so I could do a story on it. The Acura engine is very close to production, and their approach to it is to use as many OEM components as possible. So the engine is a J series engine. It is based on the J35. And the most surprising thing about that is the J35 is used in a wide variety of vehicles, but that specific block, which I verified with the engineers by the part number, comes in vehicles like the Accord, but also, and like the last generation TL, but also, most surprisingly, the Honda Odyssey minivan. So the Acura DPI is running a minivan, a production minivan engine block. So that was very interesting to hear, and kind of unique to that. But they take the minivan block, I believe, if I remember correctly, it's been a few months. It's the stock crank, and then they deck hone the block, which means that they lock it down and hone it to a very precise measurement, and then they have racing some racing spec pistons and so on that they put in there to make it a little bit stronger. And then the cylinder heads are production castings. So again, Acura TL, Honda Odyssey cylinder heads that you would find on the on the street, and then they do a few changes to the cylinder heads, as far as I think with the valves and the cams, just slight changes, but the engine is fairly close to production. Now, of course, they're bolting on a couple of turbochargers, Borg-Warner turbochargers. So that's where those pistons that I mentioned come into play, because the custom race spec pistons are built to lower compression to be able to handle the boost. And since they're introducing the turbochargers, if you feed more air, you're going to need more fuel. So they upgrade the fuel system. But their approach is unique because they're not using modified or customized fuel injectors. What they actually do is they just double up. So that engine is built with direct injection. So there are direct injectors that spray fuel directly into the cylinders. And what they ended up doing is the intake that they built, which is a custom intake for the race car application, they added another set of injectors from the last generation J series motor. So instead of putting 6 big injectors or building custom direct injectors, they use the factory direct injection system off the street, and then use the last generation port injection system to spray fuel in the intake path to be able to give it enough fuel to meet the air that's coming in from those turbochargers, so it can run a proper air fuel ratio and make power. In addition to that, they do a few other customizations with reinforcing the block and so on because of how it's mounted in there, so it can handle the stress. And the last change, which I found very interesting, is the ignition system. That is modified, but it's modified with factory Honda components, and the ignition coils in the DPI actually come from, I believe it's a Honda CBR 1000 RR motorcycle. So it's a very, very unique package. And I found it very interesting that their approach there is because they know these OEM, streetcar components have been, tested and proven that, they decide basically, let's use as many of these as possible. And of course, that can be seen with, how reliable their engine was versus, something like the Mazda.
Yeah, sure. Makes sense. Very interesting there. One question that came to mind with the Acura engine is, do they get the same fuel mileage out of some of the other engines with all of the components that are involved in the fueling there?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't really looked at it, but I would think that their fuel economy would be pretty decent just because they have so much control of it. And from what the HPD engineers told me is because they're using OEM components, Honda corporate, big Honda, lets them use the engineers that worked on those specific components on the OEM side for the street, lets them join them, for sessions or, to bounce ideas back and forth or to contribute to the project. So I think that they get, even on that side, they probably get some benefit there.
Yeah, makes sense. Moving down into the LMP2 category, one note there is all the cars use the same engine, which would be the Gibson GK428 V8. So this discussion will be much easier in the LMP2 category, and I'll let you take it from there.
Sure. So the GK428 is a spec engine for the whole class. So there's not, unlike DPI, there's not really any specific changes between cars, teams, or whoever's running in that class. But Gibson Technology builds a whole bunch of racing specific engines. So they build a lot of V8s, but all of their engines aren't really production based. They're designed from scratch to be used in racing. So that GK428 can produce, I think, up to 600 horsepower or so, and then depending on how they set them, and it's a 4.2 liter V8, and I think it weighs like 130 or 140 kilograms. So it's a very kind of just racing spec engine that there's not a whole lot about it out there, but it's just a V8 kind of that's designed for that specific task.
Sure. Yeah, and for those curious, some LMP2 entrants this year include James Davison, also racing just about everywhere this year, and Dragon Speed and Ben Hanley are also down in the LMP2 category. So we will move on to GTLM, which is the Corvette engine you mentioned about, so we can start there.
Correct. So we can jump into that. GTLM is an interesting class because those are also production-based engines. And the Corvette engine is especially interesting this year because they're changing the formula. So previously, the C7R, C6R, and so on, going back, to all the older Corvettes, used a pushrod V8 because that's what was available on the street. But now, the new C8R, which is the mid-engine Corvettes, the older one was kind of mid-engine. It was front mid-engine, but this one, the engine's in the back, so it's rear mid-engine. So that's kind of the common name for it. But with this one, Corvette Racing released some information saying that the race car now has a dual overhead cam engine with a flat plane crank. And this was kind of significant even for the street car because the homologation rules that the GTLM cars fall under from the FIA and ACO and IMSA that all follow the same rule set state that the GTLM cars, there have to be, I believe, at least 300 street cars produced that use that engine. So that was kind of significant because the initial C8 street car that was released currently has a pushrod motor, which is the LT2, which is based on the LT1 used in the previous generation. So what that ended up telling us is that we're going to get, in addition to the race car, we're going to get a really cool street car engine as well, which is going to have to be a dual overhead cam engine. The flat plane crank part is a free part as far as the rules are concerned, so it's not tied to the homologation. So the street car may not necessarily have the flat plane crank, but we're going to have our first Corvette street car with a dual overhead cam V8 since the ZR1 in like 1990 or 1991. So that's going to be very interesting. That, of course, has changed the sound of the car completely because of the arrangement and because of the firing order. So even though it has a flat plane crank, it doesn't quite sound exactly like other recent V8s that have had a flat plane crank, like the Ford Mustang Shelby GT350R, the street car, which has a V8 with a flat plane crank. And that is because of the specific firing order. So the C8R race car probably has a firing order that is optimized to, give them the most efficiency for racing, while the street car is optimized for that end. So I was at the Roar here a couple of days ago, and I walked over there and just checked out some of the stuff they were working on, and I could see some of the stuff that they talked about when I visited with them at Petit when they had the car there. And they've built the whole car, the race car, and even the street car a little bit to be optimized for that engine. So the intake system and everything, the roof of the race car actually is designed with kind of a scallop in it because of the airflow that they're getting to the engine. And then on the race car, that air comes off the roof, goes down the hatch, and there's a large inlet there at the bottom of the hatch to basically force air into the engine. Of course, because of balance of performance, they have a restrictor in there, and they'll probably get, another restrictor depending on what they decide, what IMSA decides between here and the 24. But it's definitely going to be an interesting engine to watch. And from what I've heard, just from rumors and engineers, that the engine is fairly unstressed, because the rumor is that the production version of that engine is going to be twin turbocharged and set to make something like 800 or 900 horsepower for the street. It's just kind of wild that the race car is going to be making so much less. But basically, I think that their goal there, instead of turbocharging it, because they could make what's kind of required by BOP, is they decided, let's make it more reliable and just run it in a naturally aspirated form. So that should be very interesting.
Yes, that's sounds very interesting. The car is beautiful. Both the street car when they announced it at the auto shows and what I've seen so far in pictures looks really nice. The Rahal cars, which are the BMW, the only BMW class or car in this class.
Yeah. So that one is, I think they call that engine the P63 or the SP63, which is it's a 4-liter dual overhead cam V8, and that is basically a race version of what they have in some of the street cars. Is called the N63 in the street cars, and that just kind of like the Corvette motor is very similar. The N63 in the street cars makes something like 600 horsepower and almost 600 pound-feet of torque, but because of BOP, it makes less in the race car. But the BMW engine is twin turbocharged, dual overhead cam with variable valve timing, and it is a 4-liter, so it's smaller displacement but twin turbocharged. So that's kind of where it differs from the Corvette.
Awesome. So we've got two more here in GTLM. The Ferrari and the Porsche. The Porsche, which ran the super awesome Coca-Cola livery at the Petit Le Mans at the end of last year, and the Ferrari 488. So I'll leave it up to you, whichever way you want to go with these last two.
Sure. So the Ferrari 488 GTE is actually fairly similar to the BMW as far as kind of specs are concerned. So it is a 4-liter V8 that's also turbocharged, intended for high revs and same kind of mounting location. So very, very similar formula to the BMW. And like the BMW, of course, because of the rules, it's based on the street car. So it's something that you can find in the 488 street car in a different kind of different configuration, but it's kind of the standard formula for now. And what some people are saying about the Corvette and the Porsche is that they now sound more like the Ferrari, because they're kind of trying to follow a similar formula, even though the Corvette is naturally aspirated because of because of the configuration and the firing orders. They're all starting to sound a little bit familiar, which is some fans aren't too excited about, because the Porsche had its own unique sound in the past and how the updates changed that, and then the Corvette had that kind of classic American throaty pushrod sound, so that's changed as well. And then as far as the Porsche, which did have that very 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 awesome Coca-Cola livery, I was hoping that we'd see some more of that. The cars that they had out at the Roar, which I haven't really read the announcements on what liveries they're going to do or keep or not, because a lot of people, test and blank or kind of sample liveries during the Roar. But it looks cool. It's, kind of classic, kind of white, gray, and red with, the black accents. But the Coca-Cola livery would definitely be a welcome position. Now, the Porsche, because they use boxer motors in their street cars, which are horizontally opposed motors, that's what they use in the race car. So the Porsche has a 6-cylinder horizontally opposed engine that, kind of like the BMW and the Ferrari, has also 4 liters of displacement. So it's kind of a similar formula, even though it's a completely different engine configuration. But it, like the others, it makes, depending on BOP, just over 500 horsepower or 550, whatever their settings are now. And it has an interesting sound, but that whole class is kind of starting to, as far as the exhausts are concerned, is kind of starting to melt together and sound a bit similar, with the BMW kind of being, I think, the quietest of them all.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that from the little I was able to watch of the Roar this weekend. Before we get to the GTD class, for those wanting to know more about the ever popular or not popular balance of performance, I'll actually be doing an episode on that in the next few weeks or so. So look forward to that so you can understand that before the Rolex comes out. So the last class, which has the most cars and the most entries, but I believe is, the engines are all relatively close to the same, is the GTD class.
Correct. So we discussed the Acura DPI, which is which has a 3.5 liter V6. So there's an Acura NSX GTD car, which also has a 3.5 liter V6 that's also twin turbocharged. But because the GTD cars meet, GT3, GT3 specs, they're much closer to production, what you would find, available on the street. So even though the both Acuras have the same displacement, same configurations, and twin turbochargers, they're quite a bit different. And that comes from the fact that the NSX GTD car uses most of the NSX production engine. So it actually gets probably less changes than what happens with the motor that goes into the DPI. And it's also technically newer because the J-Series motor in the DPI has been around for a while. And even that part number, I think, has been in use since 2012. The NSX engine has only been used in the NSX, and they basically take it as is and mostly do race-related reliability modifications. So that's, changing the oil system, from wet sump to dry sump, and some of those changes like that. And the rest of the field is fairly similar. So you have something, something like the Lamborghini. The Lamborghini has basically the street car motor, same displacement, same compression ratio, and just customized engine management, which is kind of relevant for the whole class. So even though the engine might be the street car engine, which the Lamborghini should have the 5.2 liter V10, engine management, which controls the fueling and timing, will be a motorsport spec. So something like the Bosch Motorsport MS6 system will control the fueling of the engine and how it runs, and it will also log data and record it, and it will interface with various logging systems that might be required by the series or that might be used by engineers on the team. And there are a variety of other cars, and Mercedes and the Aston Martin in that class use kind of the same base engines. And they're actually quite similar to the GTLM engines because they are turbocharged 4-liter V8. And if, that formula, seems to kind of repeat itself, and that mostly starts from street cars. So what's recently been kind of discovered or researched by manufacturers over the past decade or two is that for engines about 500 cc's per cylinder is a good formula if you're turbocharging. So you'll see a lot of street cars that have, if they're a 4-cylinder, they'll have a 2000 cc or 2-liter engines, a 2-liter engine if they're being turbocharged, if they're a 6-cylinder, a 3-liter, if they're a V8, a 4-liter. And that kind of slides us over just a little bit into Michelin Pilot Challenge, which is the sports series, which we'll just have a quick visit to, where you'll see the TCR cars, which run 4-cylinder engines, are all 2 liters. So it's a repetitive formula, and it's not necessarily because it's, what racing, it wants or needs at the moment, but it's what's provided by the OEMs because they found that to be the most efficient formula for the street. And I actually got to visit with some of the AMG parts people when I was at the Roar in their parts hauler, just working on some stuff with some video stuff with Grassroots Motorsports and some a story. And we were talking about the engines, and the AMG team there supports GT3 and GT4, which is GS and IMSA. And they found those engines to be very reliable, where the cars like the one run by Keating have, not really had any engine issues. And they told me that they keep one spare engine there to support teams that bring, GT3, GTD cars there. And the engine that they put on in 2016 on the trailer is still the same one that's sitting there. So the engines in the cars are reliable enough where they can pretty much run them all season and then just do a scheduled refresh or replacement whenever they decide to do it, and not have unforeseen failures.
Yeah, that's awesome. This has been very helpful for me to get a grasp on everything as we approach the IMSA season. Just highlighting some INDYCAR names for the crossover here before we wrap it up. Jumping back up to GTLM, Colton Herta is doing the Rolex with Team Rahal again. Let me see here. Is there anybody else in GTLM? I don't think so. Nope. And then going down into GTD, Catherine Legg is in a Lamborghini. Aaron Telitz is in one of the Lexus, not INDYCAR, but Kyle Busch is in a Lexus as well. So is Jack Hawksworth, and the list goes on. And I think there's a few others that I'm probably missing, but there's about 100 names on this list here. So I'm not going to scroll through the rest of them here. Bozi, thank you very much for the educational session here on all the different engine components that go into IMSA. I know it can be daunting to look at for some fans out there. So I appreciate all the help, and look forward to hopefully chatting again with you at some point throughout 2020.
Oh, of course. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm always glad to share some engine knowledge. I like to nerd out on the technical stuff, and I'm a very competitive person, but I also like to get down into the little details and see exactly what makes these things tick, and kind of what everything that goes into them. So it's cool info for me, and I'm always glad to share it. And hopefully I'll be down there for 24, and maybe we can run into each other.
Yeah, perfect. Sounds good. Have a good night, man. I appreciate it.
You too. Thank you.